Hello, I'm Ronnie Eldridge. Welcome to Eldridge and Company. I'm really anxious to talk about city politics and the mayoral race, so I can't wait to talk to Dan Janison, who was the City Hall bureau chief for Newsday. So do we have a serious election coming up? The mayoral election?
All elections are serious, of course,
yes.
But what we're looking at is sort of a repeat of '97, where the pressures are on the challenger to sort of create a race, and it's been a real uphill climb for the challenger on the Democratic side, Fernando Ferrer.
You said the term limits affects that, and the term limits started in 2001, right? Up until that time, we had mayors sometimes. Well, Koch ran what? He was mayor 4 times.
He made it for 3 terms.
3 terms.
He made it through 3 terms.
And Lindsay was just 2.
Correct.
Right. Beam was 2.
Beam was 1.
1.
Who turned out after 1?
Who defeated him?
Ian Dinkins. Mr. Koch. He actually lost in a Democratic primary. He lost the primary to a runoff between Koch and Cuomo, and then Koch ultimately.
I don't know why I'm asking. You most likely weren't even born then.
No, I was born then. I was very much around.
All right.
Thank you, though.
Dinkins was only 1 term.
Correct.
And he lost in a midterm election, so that was unusual.
That's right.
I mean, in his term, he was the incumbent challenge. But so then Giuliani didn't run again because he was term limited.
That's right.
I see.
And
Ruth Messenger ran against him for the 2nd term, and it was difficult.
That's right.
And so it's got a two-way thing. It's hard to run against an incumbent, number 1. And number 2, the other side of that is one of the reasons it's hard to run against the incumbent is people say, why change, right?
Why change, and it's only going to be 1 more term? Remember, there's a dynamic that happened in 2001 that may be happening again here. You had Ferrer against Green in the runoff. Ultimately, Ferrer didn't really support Green. His support was pro forma. And in the back of everyone's mind was that Ferrer would become the candidate in 2005. So we could take it back any time, think the Democrats. Now we have a situation where there are Democrats who are thinking, well, it's going to be vacant again in 4 years, so maybe Bill Thompson will be the strong candidate, and we'll kind of put our hopes on getting City Hall back then.
Now, what happens when you're a Democrat like me who believes that none of these people are strong candidates, and that it's time the Democratic Party started getting some strong candidates?
Well, have you run? Are you going? Are you giving?
I'm aging out.
Are you giving Hillary a primary?
No, I'm not doing that. Okay. But I don't understand why the party is not developing some candidates, and I think we are in a state where we see a very weak, poor Democratic Party in the city and in the state.
Well, you have Bloomberg.
Exactly,
I mean, I say
and he's
that
a Democrat.
Right. But Giuliani became a Democrat in '97 as well, if you recall. He was running around with a lot of people who, his deputy mayor lined up half the city council to support him, and
because he
became
was
titular head of your party,
trading off and buying all the hack Democratic politicians in the city council. I mean, as far as I don't remember it all very well, but anyway, I don't understand how we allowed this to happen. And I once talked to Bill Cunningham and said that I think that Bloomberg should become a Democrat and run in the Democratic primary. I think he belongs in the Democratic Party. He was a Democrat, and I still believe he would have won that primary if he had become a Democrat.
If he had become a Democrat again. There were probably complications that they figured out that I haven't figured out.
Well, I don't know. I think they overestimated their opposition. I mean, I don't believe people took the Democratic primary with all of its candidates seriously.
Turnout was probably about 18%, which is, I think it was a bit better than, again, the model '97, which was the re-election under term limits.
Yeah.
We were also infused, and a lot of it was what we in the news media do, with covering horse races. We're infused with a lot of, well, Bloomberg's going to win anyway. Look, his approval rating is way up. He's giving tax rebates based on the property tax that he raised 2 years ago. And for the mayor, it's as if the last 2 years have been have been the courting period, and the first 2 years were the pain period. So there's kind of this timing is everything, and people forget element to the whole thing.
Do you think you're very cynical as a result of being a reporter of the events?
I'm skeptical. I wouldn't say cynical. I reserve the term cynicism for a lot of what goes on among the powerful.
Right. What's the difference between the two candidates running for mayor now? I'm not considering Ogneveny. I mean, only because there's a clear difference between Ogneveny, I think, and the other two.
One is in power and defends the status quo in a slight way, and the other is not. They both have probably the same sense of where public opinion surveys are, and those are sort of driving a lot of what they're saying. There's this kind of struggle for the center. There's sort of a sense of consensus among, people who actually go out and vote in the city. And bear in mind, there's a relatively narrow band of people who vote. There are what the professionals call the primes and the super primes, the people who always vote.
Vote in primaries as well as general elections.
But the question of who turns out is always a shift. Will there be a big Latino turnout for Ferrer? There'll be more than usual, certainly. So that's a new group of voters. So the question comes down in these waning days of the election as to who is actually going to turn out, and that's going to determine what the margins might be.
Don't you think, though, that we keep campaigning to an increasingly diminishing group, right? Does it keep getting lower, or is it about the same? It doesn't expand, basically.
Well, things expand. There are demographic changes. This is not the city it was 20 years ago, ethnically, racially. And so there are changes, and there is a substantial black vote, and there's a substantial Hispanic vote, and the white vote sort of becomes something of a white vote. It used to be divided among sub-ethnic votes. Now there's kind of a consolidated white vote where people who are living in Gravesend may vote for Tony Weiner regardless of what his ethnicity is. So it's
Gravesend
things have
not
changed.
Being a Jewish population.
Well, being
saying?
more mixed between Catholics and Jews.
Yeah.
I don't think the distinction between them is that important anymore.
Right. I think that follows a pattern in life too, don't you think? As a Jewish person married to a Catholic person, I don't know. Do you think that we've not had attractive enough candidates that we can't break out some of these barriers and enlarge the voting?
The rationale has to be, what do people want in the neighborhoods, and where is the candidate going to come from? Where are people going to be represented? And maybe the Democratic Party isn't the way the people will become represented.
Now that leads me to another question. If you were appointed as a commission, something like that, with the mandate of making recommendations on how you would reorganize the government, I don't mean necessarily with just agencies, but with power and elected officials, could you think of things you would change?
Not being on the charter commissions, I'm in the convenient position as critic of being able to say that the charter commissions you've had over the last 10 years have just been kind of nibbling around the margins. I haven't given a lot of thought to it, have you? You're the policymaker around here.
I mean, the one charter commission did make significant changes that was responding to the court case with the borough, with the Board of Estimate, changing that and taking powers away from borough presidents and giving a lot of it to the council. And in giving all that power to the council, it seems to me it makes the Speaker of the council a very important person in the government. And the Speaker is elected by the other council members. And we know that the council members are directed in large part by county leaders, or were when parties were stronger. So my question is, I think that's a very important role. And then you look at the public advocate, which I've always maintained, which they kept as the public advocate instead of the president of the city council because they had an incumbent. And I always maintained it was because they also wanted that eastern side of City Hall, and they could move the president of the city council out.
It's entirely possible.
I think it definitely was, because Andrew Stein was the president of city council, and he had a good portion of the east side of City Hall, the west side being the mayor's. And they wanted that space. I mean, the speaker didn't have enough space, so the Charter Commission changed it to the public advocate, which was a role that Paul O'Dwyer developed when he was president of city council, because he really had nothing else to do. And I think within those two offices, there's room for great change and a shifting of power. I think and I know that then you get into a whole argument about the organization of legislative bodies, but I think we may be outgrowing the age where the legislative bodies themselves select their speakers.
So you would suggest, it sounds like,
A citywide
person
back to either
who
president
presides
or
over the city council.
Yeah.
Would that be consistent with one man, one vote? I guess it would be.
Sure, it would be better, I think.
It would be a powerful citywide position
Right.
as a counterweight to
Right.
the mayor.
The other question, of course, is do we need to have partisan elections? I mean, what is the point of having... Bloomberg did suggest nonpartisan elections, right?
Voted down 4-1, I think.
Right. By the prime voters.
By the prime voters. By
Who
a
are the
small
voters that
percentage
the
of them.
organizations and the parties can turn out?
I don't know, but I think it was probably about the same proportion of the voters who voted in term limits.
Yeah, that's interesting.
So you could probably argue the case either way. Term limits was probably a bigger chunk of the vote, but it wasn't a huge majority.
So what do you think about reorganizing the government?
Things don't happen in a vacuum, and when they have to do it, something will happen. You know, when there's some political impulse that comes up from the neighborhoods, that's the only way things are probably going to change. The mayors are happy to be very powerful mayors.
Oh, definitely. But the people shouldn't be that happy that the council speaker is so powerful, but not at all accountable, really, except to the members.
I don't know how you would actually have a speaker act as a speaker if the speaker were
most likely couldn't.
independently
Right,
elected.
then you'd have a speaker someplace. I mean,
Then
you'd still
someone
have
would
a
develop as a
sub-organization.
caucus
as a
leader
caucus.
in a different way.
Yeah. Well, you talk about the communities, and you say you can't have any change unless, or a lot of the change, and that the mayoral candidates are responding to community wishes and needs. So, do you ever cover community boards?
I don't get out there the way I used to. I'm sort of cloistered in the hall, as it were, and responding there. And I do get a distorted view. I mean,
Yeah.
the next question is, don't you get a distorted view
Yeah.
of what's going on in the city? And the answer is yes. We kind of live in
this
a separate
political-
reality, which you're
Right.
very familiar with.
Right, this political bowl with nothing outside. And once you're outside, you look in and you think, what are these people doing? I mean, they're all running around and talking to each other, and they're responding to each other. That's why, I think this is not a serious race. I can't really believe that it's perceived that way.
No, I'm going to plead ignorance because
Yeah.
you don't know who's going to come from where.
Yeah.
What is the grand concourse suddenly going to come alive
Yeah.
on election day?
The other thing I always thought of if I was changing was the thought, and I know we've had very poor experience with elected community school boards, but who are these 50 people that get appointed who serve on a community board?
Appointed by the borough presidents, correct?
And the city council members.
And advisory powers for the most part.
But a lot of troublemaking potential,
Sure.
especially with the question of development.
If people are upset, as
Yeah.
they are in a lot of places in the city over overdevelopment,
Right.
where somebody's been living in a private house their entire life, and they've suddenly got a 6-story monstrosity coming in next door because a builder is calling it a medical facility or a dormitory, which is actually some
Right.
pretty fancy condos.
Do you? So there isn't a rationale in the government right now. That's what I'm really saying. You're saying that these candidates are responding to polls. The polls are the only people who are going out into neighborhoods. Are they really going out into neighborhoods? I guess they are. Do you like polls?
It's you know, for the macro view, it's all I got unless I'm hanging around various places all day and I'm not answering my phone.
So what you're saying is the press is just as
the
caught
polls
up
are
in this
fairly
as the,
shallow.
Yeah. So the press is, in a way, caught up the same way the politicians are.
In a sense, yeah. There's
Yes.
kind of a.
So we're not getting good communication, are we?
It's not as extensive as it could be.
Yeah.
Not into all the neighborhoods.
Do you think that?
Can you think of an issue? And I'm picking brains here.
Right.
That keeps coming to your attention that is not getting dealt with or deflected or absorbed at City Hall.
It's interesting. Yeah. Well, in my neighborhood, my neighborhood borders the central business district, and I always think that it gets regulations as if it was the central business district. You know, parking and traffic and stuff like that, and development. We have really a very dense neighborhood, so it's hard for me to do it. But that was a good question, because in a way, the government does find its floundering way to respond to major issues. It doesn't plan ahead, which is, I think, the problem. And I think that communities would like to have a participation in planning. I don't think we've had a master plan since the Lindsay administration, have we?
Probably not.
Yeah. And I think planning is important. I had on the program last week, I think it was Bob Shrum, who's now teaching at NYU. And one of the courses he's teaching is the difference between public policy as it's taught and public policy as it's executed. And in a way, it's the same with planning. You can plan everything, and then, you know, it's how Mario Cuomo got to be so much in the front of everything with the houses in Corona. It was a plan. We're going to do this. We're going to move these houses. You know,
right.
We'll take them down. And everybody said, no, you're not.
Right. And there was attention to detail.
Yeah. But you asked an interesting question, and I guess if an issue gets big enough, it gets reached at
it'll get dealt
City
with in
Council.
some way, shape, or form.
Yeah.
Perhaps late. But
Yeah.
for example, the mayor created, and I think about this because it's from neighborhoods that I'm familiar with, but overdevelopment task force. He created this thing maybe a couple of years ago and started it in Staten Island. I would say about 25 years late. I would give it,
right.
give or take 5 years, the concerns.
Yeah. Where do you live?
Brooklyn Heights these
Brooklyn.
days.
Oh, because Brooklyn Heights has expanded? When you say these days, what do you mean?
I mean in my
That's where you're living
latest
these days.
incarnate,
I
this
see.
is where I live these days.
Where
yes.
did you grow up?
Kings Highway area, and I lived in Staten Island a number of years.
Do you find it frustrating to report and not do? Have you ever wanted to be a participant in an argument or an advocate for something?
No, not in particular. I always liked the press card, and I always liked the fact that I sort of knew what my role was, and I got more and more familiar with my role. And leave it to you activists to be the actors on the stage. And,
So you're standing over there watching us as we perform.
yeah, I'm just trying to describe it.
Yeah, that's interesting.
When I forget that that's my role, I usually do something to screw up.
So you really try not to have opinions, or what?
No, I got plenty of opinions, and I write them and I subject them to contradiction. But
So do you think the city runs well?
runs well. How? You want to be specific.
Yeah. Do you think?
If it's 50,000 small towns, I'll have to.
Well, I mean, does it? How do you think it could be improved? What do you think the major issues are in the city?
You've always got inequity.
Yeah.
That's something that.
Bad inequity.
Yeah, you've always got a serious inequity, and then the philosophical question became, what is government's role, and how much does government, and how much can government? You have the physical structure of the place where the city is now filled up. The infrastructure is ancient, so that when you get a water main break, you're going back to fix very old technology, and you're working with that.
Well, how do you change that? By knocking it out like New Orleans and starting over again? No.
No, you have to
Make the best of it.
replace the parts as you go along.
Right. So you think it's the inequity, you think it's the infrastructure, housing? The
Yeah.
housing is part of inequity.
Absolutely.
Affordable housing, there isn't any.
Absolutely.
Or not enough.
The city changed so that the poor are on the ring,
Yeah.
and the wealthy have reclaimed the inner parts of the city. And whether it's good or bad, you can argue that from different points of view. But that's going to be the way things are for quite some time.
In the health department in the hospital corporation, how do we take care of people?
The dynamics of healthcare have changed also, so that when the mayor came in and said, no, we're not going to privatize the hospital system and I'm going to fill some of the red ink, he looked, relative to the last mayor, like he was a great champion of public health care, which,
I think he is,
to
in a
give
way.
him to give
Yeah.
him to give him full credit, as
Yeah.
a health school named after
Right.
himself, and does take an interest in it, and has
Right.
what everyone agrees is a very credible, qualified health commissioner.
Right. So are you saying that you think the city really has to wait for other levels of government to really make any fundamental change? Do we respond? Are we less what they call these days proactive, which is a word I don't like, but I mean and reactive to the conditions around us?
You mean folks in government?
Just generally the role of the government and
Supposed to represent people.
yeah.
Get a clear idea what people need and want.
So shouldn't there be a closer connection between the city and other legislative bodies? That's something else I always have gotten the feeling. There isn't enough coordination with the congressional delegation, and we've always had problems in the state. And we have a Speaker of the Assembly who is, I'm not a great admirer. I mean, he's a little guy elected by his colleagues from the Lower East Side. I don't know, what's he representing? We should be...
Representing his caucus, or some people say not, but
Yeah.
that's his problem.
Yeah. Well, that's our problem. It becomes our problem. So, I mean, how do we can't act totally independently because we're so dependent on these other levels of government.
It's true. The state is a dominant force in the city, and a lot of people who live in the city don't really necessarily see state government a lot. You
Yeah.
see state government when you go to the Department of Motor Vehicles or you're paying.
Which is greatly
taxes.
changed. Department
Yeah.
of Motor Vehicles is fun to go to. these days.
They made some improvements.
They
it's
sure
sort of
did.
like being at the airport now,
Yeah.
waiting for your flight.
Yeah, yeah, it's good. So you asked me before we came on the program what I thought about term limits, and I had supported term limits because I thought it was the only way to clear the council, which when I was a member of dismayed me. I don't know the new council, so tell me, was it bad thing to do or?
Well, you've had a couple of you've had poster boys for the good and the bad, and I think what you've probably gained is more of a sense of freedom among committee chairs.
Which is
I
very
think-
good.
I think when you ran your committee, you were probably more subject to a central control
Right.
that maybe you would not have been under the current speaker.
Do you, is the council, there are rumors that they're talking about extending the terms?
It's more than rumors. There seems to be a real determination to go from 2 to 3 terms as a limit, or to eliminate the limit altogether. But that's going to be under the new speaker, whoever that turns out to be.
And that's without going back to the public for a referendum?
Yeah, when something took place a couple of years ago that we in the city hall world, in that part of the planet,
I don't mean to
paid
make you
attention
feel
to.
so
No, it's
isolated.
it's one of those little things
Yeah.
that nobody bothers to think
Yeah.
about, which is influential and important. It's in 2003 there was a change in the law that allowed folks like Miller and maybe a half dozen others to stay an extra 2 years, and it had to do with midterm redistricting and complexities involving that.
The people who run right after, during a census time,
Right.
before.
Once every 20
Yeah.
years. So a 2-year term which used to count as a 4-year term, now only counts as half a term.
So that's why Christine
And I can go
Quinn
back
is
over
able
that,
to
but-
keep going and on and on and on.
Correct.
Right.
Well,
She's been there for a long time.
well, she'll get a full 10 or 11 years
Yeah.
just because of the quirks of
Yeah.
the thing. Bottom line is, the courts decided it on the basis of legislation that the council passed, and no one went back for a referendum.
So you
the
think that
precedent's there for
supports-
them to do it. They can.
But is the public
Fiddle with it.
feeling there for them to do it?
Well,
Let's see.
if Bloomberg taught us anything, timing is everything. So
Yeah.
if they do it early enough in the term, maybe everybody will forget.
And who are the leading contenders to be speaker?
There are a few. I'm not really in much of a position to assess the horse race yet. You do have the Christine Quinn, obviously, and
She's from Manhattan.
from Manhattan, Melinda Katz from Queens, Leroy Comrie from Queens. Someone's mentioned Joel Rivera from the Bronx. From Brooklyn, the names include Bill de Blasio and who else?
The last speaker was
whoever I forget.
So the last speaker
hopefully
was
give me a
an
phone
agreement
call.
between the Queens County organization and the Bronx County organization,
They were important, yeah.
and they seem to be the two county organizations that still seem to be more whole than the others.
Certainly Brooklyn is split.
Yeah,
Brooklyn seems to be perennially split.
and
so
it's floundering without its county leader.
yes, the Queens-Bronx thing may well determine.
So I get the feeling that you're not unoptimistic about the city. It's just going to continue to go on and keep replacing itself, and it'll go.
yes,
right.
broad visions of things. I don't know.
Yeah. Well, thank you, Dan. It's been a half hour. And we've come to the end of this discussion, but I hope we continue it again at another time. Thanks
Thank
very
you
much.
very much.
Thank you. If there are any people you'd like to hear and topics you'd like us to explore, please let me know. You can write to me at CUNY TV, 365 Fifth Avenue, New York, New York, 10016, or you can go to the website at cuny.tv and click on Contact Us. I look forward to hearing from you.